As soon as they stepped out of the store, the strange puzzle started to make sense. He didn't offer her a choice or even a proper explanation, he simply told her he had rented her for a while. The word alone made her freeze, unsure whether to run or argue, but his tone left no room for either. He needed her to play the role of his wife, not forever, not even for a day, just for one critical hour. She couldn't imagine why someone like him would go to such extremes, but he made the stakes painfully clear. Without her cooperation, she'd be out on the street with nothing. Every part of it felt wrong, yet there was something desperate in his eyes, something hidden beneath the arrogance. She didn't understand what game he was playing or why she was the missing piece, but refusing no longer felt like an option. And so the act began. It all began on an ordinary day that suddenly took a wild turn. The girl, struggling with her own hardships, walked into a store only to be accused of stealing. Panic filled her eyes as the guards grabbed her, dragging her toward the exit and threatening to call the police. She kept insisting she wasn't a thief, but no one listened, until a sharply dressed young man stepped forward. He didn't even ask for an explanation, he simply said he would pay for everything. Then, without hesitation, he demanded the staff bring her the most expensive dress and jewelry in the store. She stood there confused, unsure whether he was saving her or trapping her in something she didn't understand. His cold confidence made it clear he wasn't doing this out of kindness. He had a plan, and somehow, she had just become a part of it. And that was only the beginning. Their growing closeness didn't go unnoticed for long. When his father returned and saw the warmth between them, his face hardened instantly. To him, love was a weakness, a distraction from power, and he wasted no time demanding that his son prove where his true loyalty lay. With an icy calmness, he ordered him to get rid of her, right there, right then, calling it the final test before he handed over full control of the empire. The son froze, torn between the life he'd been raised for and the life he'd only just begun to understand. She stepped back, hurt but unsurprised, convinced he would choose the world he'd always known. But instead, he shocked them both. He refused the fortune, refused the manipulation, refused to become the cold successor his father had shaped. He walked away from everything, money, business, legacy, without looking back. And he walked toward her. When the list was finally complete, she led him into a small room filled with all the things he'd bought, bright colors, tiny gifts, the kind of simple joys most children grow up with. He stood there confused until she quietly lit the candles on the cake and told him they were celebrating the childhood he never had. For a moment, he looked almost fragile, like a boy who had spent his entire life being hardened into someone else's image. But as the evening unfolded, something remarkable happened. He laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. They played, they talked, and with every passing minute, the walls he'd built around himself began to crumble. She wasn't trying to fix him, she was showing him what it felt like to be human again. And somewhere in between the laughter and the quiet moments, he realized he didn't want this feeling to end. And that realization changed everything. Once the father's signature dried, she found herself holding a power she never asked for but couldn't ignore. And the moment the son tried to demand his inheritance back, she realized exactly how he'd treated her from the beginning, like a tool, a temporary convenience. So, with a calmness that surprised even her, she turned his own rules against him. If he wanted anything, he'd have to follow her terms now. She handed him a list that seemed absurd at first glance: children's pajamas, cake, toys, scooters. He stared at it like she'd lost her mind, but she didn't budge. Each item had a purpose he didn't understand yet. She wasn't trying to humiliate him, she was trying to reach the part of him his father had crushed long ago. And as he reluctantly fulfilled each demand, something in him began to soften, to remember, to feel. And that's when everything shifted. When they finally stood before his father, everything became clearer, and yet far more complicated. The old man's eyes softened the moment he saw her, admiring her beauty, her grace, and the way she carried herself despite the chaos she'd been forced into. He believed every bit of their performance, smiling with the relief of a man who thought his son had finally found the perfect partner. And then came the moment that neither of them expected. With a firm, almost ceremonial tone, the father announced that he would transfer his entire empire, his businesses, his estates, his wealth, to the new bride. Not to his son. To her. The papers were already prepared, all that was left was his signature. She watched the son's face twist from shock to panic, realizing he had just handed over everything to a stranger he barely knew. And in that instant, their roles reversed.